And it's a good thing it's not 10 phases, because Mercury only has room for 9. Each phase is, the minimum is 13 days, a Tersina. And 9 times 13 is 117. And so that is the entire Mercury cycle, is 117 days on the official nominal cycle, the one that's a whole number of Tersinas. So that means Mercury goes around through the cycle more than 3 times a year. In fact, we talked about how it's pi times per year, 22 sevenths. But anyway, 22 cycles in 7 years. So going on from there, I might have talked some of this last time, but this is so important, it's worth a review. Because I remember saying this, the Savior's life is mostly on the Venus calendar, but that is 5 times as long as cycle. And in 33 years, you just can't do too much in whole numbers of cycles. So the way his life was on the Venus calendar was 9 different events in his life were at all 9 different holy places in the cycle, which is amazing, by the way. That all of this is amazing, I think. I can't believe that was all crammed into those few years to have, because they have to be holy days. They're holy days on 6 or 7 calendars. They're holy days on Hebrew calendar and all these other calendars. And so Sacred Round, etc. So anyway, his life is amazing on the Venus calendar. On the Mercury calendar, his life is amazing in whole numbers of cycles. So his entire life, let's first do it in the uniform cycles of 117 days. From his birth and to his resurrection, it's not death on this case, it's resurrection, is 100, it's actually the second line here, it's 103 Mercs, I call them. This cycle is so important in the whole solar system. It looks like many of the outer planets are designed to be integer number of Mercs, where Mercury is 1 Merc, hence the name. So his life is 103 Mercs. 103 times 117, as it says in the label above, is in fact the 1,251 days of his from life, from birth to resurrection. That same length of time, if you do the actual cycles, which are 115.88 days, you get exactly 1 extra cycle in there. And it's 104 cycles from birth to resurrection. And that's also the shortest period. I remember saying all this, so I don't want to review it anymore. But that's the shortest period in which the cycles come out even, is the length of his life. So it's called an alignment, a realignment interval. And then also it turns out his baptism is right on one of the holy cycles. So he's born on 1 Lord Mercury, baptized on 0 Lord, and resurrects on 1 Lord. And of course, we already said his baptism was on 13 water. And on the Hebrew calendar, it's on the Day of Atonement. It's one of the holy days, and most holy days in history. It's on almost as many as the resurrection. I think it's only 1 or 2 short. So next slide, 164. John the Baptist, his life is mostly on the Mars cycle, which we haven't got to yet. But it also comes out on the Mercury cycle. He's born on 1 adult on both the Mercury and the uniform Mercury calendars. And he's on 1 monkey. It's the 6th of October, 2 BC. It's on our calendar, we'd say it's exactly 6 months before Jesus on 6 October. The evening preceding 6 October, 1 BC. but it's on one monkey, which has to do with new beginnings and priesthood. I don't fully understand monkey, but he's born on the Day of Atonement, and it's one quickening on the, his light doesn't do much on the Venus calendar, but it is one quickening on the uniform Venus. If we now go to 165 and look at his death is pretty easy to find. The birth is easy to find too. I mean, it's 6 months before Jesus. But the death was a little harder. It's a day on which Herod's having his birthday party. Is interesting. They tell you roughly when it is, thanks to John telling you the things that happened before Herod was put in jail and before his death. And it's not clear to me right now. I don't remember exactly how this date was picked, but it's a whole number of cycles on the Mars calendar. He was born on one birth, Mars, dies on 0 birth. We've talked about how that's an exact number of cycles. And 0 quickening, which is an exact number of cycles on UV, because he was on one quickening. But here it is on Mercury. He was born on one adult, Mercury on both calendars, and he dies on one adult on both calendars. And these two calendars, the one has the extra cycle in it. I think we'll see that on the next slide. And he's on tabernacles on 3 different. His life is amazing. When Jesus said, no greater prophet, nobody has birth and death dates like John the Baptist. None of them, not Abraham. Nobody has this many. And the cycles. Let's look at the next slide. The next slide shows how his life comes out on sacred calendars. And his life is shorter than Jesus's. Jesus was 103 and 104 cycles. His is 100 and 101 Mercury cycles. So the 100 is exactly 11,700 days. I mean, this is an amazing period of time. It's 45 sacred rounds. It's 15 Mars cycles. And it's 24 uniform Venus cycles. When we looked at the different planets, Mars and Venus are in a 3 to 4 ratio. Venus goes around 4 times, while Mars goes around 3 times through the cycle. Not perfect, but in a shorter period as 30 years, it is perfect. It comes out exact. So the caption says, for such a short life, John the Baptist had an amazing number of sacred cycles. This just blew me away when I discovered it, when it was discovered to me. Exactly completed, it's 100 mercs. So you come down here, it's not only an exact number of both Mercury and uniform Mercury, of Mars, uniform Venus. It's also sacred rounds. See, it's 45 sacred rounds. A sacred round starting on one monkey ends on 13 dog. The day after 13 dog is one monkey. And so it's on all of those cycles, and it's on these other 2 calendars. There it is. So anyway, Mercury is important for short periods of times, like 30 years. Next slide, 167. The Virgin Mary, her birthday is so good. For almost everybody, I need the year to get their birth date, because there's usually several choices. We sort of know the year because she's got to be somewhere from 13 years old to 20 years old. I mean, there's a few. She's worth hunting for. I'll hunt through 5 or 6 years to find her. And it's more like 14 to 18 is probably how old she was when she's married. 18 in those days is getting pretty old. That's like, it's a lot of, in Arabia today, 15 as an old maid, I think, or something I've read. So I knew within 3 or 4 years. But when her date was found, it just jumps out. And again, this is amazing. I don't have Eve's birth date. Hers is going to be equivalent to Adam's. I don't even have a clue at all to within 20 years when she's born. And I guess I could hunt for that someday, but I have never done that. Virgin Mary is born on Sunday, the 5th of December, 19 BC. She's going to be, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But you can see how old she's going to be. Jesus is born in 1 BC, 18 years later. She's going to be 17, I think, when she's married, and 18 when he's born. But she's born on one birth, one wind. We have seen, for those of you who are memorizing everything, we've done Venus and sacred round calendars. Miriam, I believe maybe we haven't done her yet. But Moses's elder sister and seeress, Miriam, which is Mary in Hebrew. The word Mary we have is from Greek. Marie. Miriam was born on one birth and one wind. 1 Kislev was Rebecca's birthday. And she's born on 1 Kislev on the Hebrew. And she's born on trumpets in the uniform Enoch. This one is not usually good for birthdays, but she gets it. Trumpets is a major holy day, and the year is a holy year. It's Passover when she is born. It's not going to be Passover when Jesus is born, because obviously that's 18 years later. Mary gets super treatment, and her birthday ranks up with John the Baptist, and it's related. Oh, I think I'm going to show that. Let's look at the next slide, 168, and it'll come in a minute, I think. Let's look at her death. Many traditions talk about Mary goes to Avalon, England, with Joseph of Arimathea. In fact, the article I have that just came out on the last day of January talked about how there was persecution that erupted in 44 AD, where not John, but James, the apostle, was martyred. And they threw a bunch of people in jail, including Mary and Joseph of Arimathea, Mary Magdalene, and a bunch of the ones that they'd kind of like to kill pretty soon, because Herod had a real good reception for killing James, and people wanted a lot more of those crazy Christians killed. So they all got put in jail. And then they realized that was too many to kill and there'd be an uprising. So they did a sort of a standard thing that was done back in those days. And you put them in a boat and send them off to sea in a situation that ought to kill them, like no oars, no sails, and no food. So they're really trying to kill them, but to say, well, hey, it wasn't our fault. God could have saved them. And so that's what happens. The boat floats down to Africa, which isn't too far, and they get sails and oars and food, and Joseph of Arimathea knows the way to Britain, England, because he's a tin trader and he knows the route. So they now can sail where they want, and he knows the way, and they stop at Marseille, France, and Mary Magdalene gets off with the other two Marys, and Mary, Virgin Mary, and Joseph of Arimathea go on to the tin mines, and where he's good. And it also says that the Apostle Philip was sending him on a mission to start the church there. So he does. He starts a church, and Mary spends her last 4 years of life there and dies in AD 48. And it's that her death is actually in the records of the church in Avalon, Britannia, which was renamed Glastonbury, England. See, England, the English don't come till AD 600. This was called Britain or Britannia. The Anglos and the Saxons are the English. Anyway, anyway, they have a church there. They actually had records that say when Mary died in AD 48. As soon as I found that out, I said, aha, I can check the year. I can go through it, and it's September 26th, 48. And it's going to match, for instance, Tabernacles UE. Anyway, it's going to match her birth and important dates in her life and her son's life. Anyway, it's on trumpets, it's on resurrection on Mercury, one adult, and that's when bad things come into your life, adult, and that's death. Storm is also bad times. Storm is the birth date of Rachel and Leah. So she's going to be tied to them. One Heshvan ties to Rachel and Leah too. Let's go to the next slide. I think that's the one that's going to be, yes, this is the one, 169. This shows how many ties Mary has to Rachel and Leah, Miriam, and Rebecca. And I don't even have the one on the Heshvan. That should be added into this because that was discovered after the slide was made. Oh, here it is. I've got it up here. Another is one Heshvan. But so this is how you know you have the right date, because there could be some nifty date in the year AD 48, but if it has nothing to do with her son Jesus, I don't have any information on Joseph or any other children or anything, but it ought to tie to Jesus somehow, and it ought to tie to the other great women who are basically symbolic of her. For instance, Rachel has a son in Bethlehem named Benjamin. Mary has a son, gives birth to a son in Bethlehem. Miriam is the same name as Mary. And so anyway, I've got her at the center of this because she ties to all of them, and they don't tie to each other particularly. Rachel and Leah tie in three ways because they're twins. And so on those three ways, they're born on the same day. So that's not miraculous. But Mary ties to Rachel more than Leah. This could have been done just with the three, but Leah always gets left out, and I didn't want to do that. But Miriam, see, there it is, one birth, one wind. And here's Rebecca on one birth and one Kislev. So here you see the power of this. There's no question about what Mary's birth date is and Mary's death date, because it ties to the exact dates. And it's probably the holiest day of the year in AD 48. If it's not, it'll be in the top, 2 or 3. But what makes you know it's her death date, not somebody else's, is all of these ties to the other great women, matriarchs or wives of patriarchs, however you want to say it. So if you're taking this course, this is the kind of stuff that's the best I have to offer. The Lord is using this system, but we're just going to keep doing more and more of this on different calendars to see how many testimonies. Next slide, 170. This is back. I'm not good on colors. I thought this was light blue. I've now learned this looks like purple to me now. Is that Glenn? Is this obviously purple?
It has a purple tint, but it's kind of light blue. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now I look at it and oh my. So I've on the more modern versions, I've updated that and made it. Anyway, it is what it is. I actually probably changed it more to the light yellowish color. But let's look at the links of her son, of Mary. I did to the great women. Now let's look at her links to her son Jesus. There's an abundance of mother-son links of identical sacred calendar holy days. That's important. They're events in his life, but they'll be on the same holy day on the same calendar. gets the most points between Virgin Mary and her son Jesus Christ. So these are mostly events in Jesus' life. The only two events I have for Mary are born and died. But she takes him to the temple on the same day on the Mercury cycle on which she's born. And remember, we made a big deal of when he goes to the temple because it was on the day one Yeshua. Anyway, we made a big deal of that's holy on a bunch of calendars. The Magi come on her birthday on the priest calendar. They go to Egypt on her birthday. It was, I remember, it's one birth. And that's her birthday on the Venus calendar. Up to the baptism of Christ, it's the exact number of cycles on the uniform. And we looked at the life of Christ on the uniform Enoch, and remember it was exactly 11 cycles. It was 3.5 years. Oh, this is too transfigured. No, this is just one. He's baptized in AD 29 and transfigured in 32. Yeah, this is 3. This is 3 years. This isn't 3.5. He's baptized in the fall and transfigured in the fall. Anyway, it's an exact number of uniform Enoch cycles. Mary's death only ties to 1. Oh yeah, it's a cool one. It's exactly a jubilee. From her, it's not a jubilee. It's the same holy day. I'll tell you the jubilee in a minute. It's the same holy day on the jubilee calendar. Is what it is. That's what all of these mean. These are just names of calendars. So the transfiguration and her death date are the same on the jubilee calendar. And then on the sacred round, she was born on, anyway, it's the same, it's an exact number of cycles from her birth to the transfiguration on the sacred round. So lots of interaction with the Savior. Next slide. Oh, let's see. Well, let's try one more. Yeah, let's just try it. We'll finish on this one, 171. I only put a little part of what's possible so you wouldn't be overwhelmed. But these patriarchs and their wives have many identical shared holy days just on the Venus calendar. So we're just going to do one calendar. Okay, not like on that last slide we had like 5 or 6 different sacred calendars. Just the Venus calendar. But look at how the wives and husbands are tied together and their children on one calendar. And I've got here that the number of exact Venus cycles is shown between the arrows. And these are all also holy days. And so let's do this one here. Rebecca, we just looked. She's born on one birth. That's the day to be born on the Venus cycle. 19 Venus cycles later, Jacob is born, which is the day to be born. And then from that birthday to Leah and Rachel's birthday is another 35 cycles. They're also born on the same day, one birth. Okay? When it comes to deaths, this time it's 0. I just happen to remember 0 Lord. Rebecca dies, I think, on 1 Lord, and Isaac dies on 0 Lord, exactly 11 cycles later. So Isaac and Rebecca are tied in their death dates by the Venus calendar. You come here with Rachel and Leah. Anyway, it ties Rachel's death and Benjamin. Obviously, it's 0 cycles. It's on the same day on the Venus calendar because she dies in childbirth. So this one's not too amazing, but a lot of women die in childbirth, and they get that link included. You come to Levi, And Levi, it ties in directly to Jacob's death. Anyway, it's just amazing. That's all on one calendar. And about half of those dates were all on one birth. They were birth dates on one birth. That's very hard to do because they're also holy days. All of them are holy days on the Hebrew calendar, and they're all holy days on the sacred round. That's like a requirement on these prophets. They're always holy on those two, sacred round and Hebrew. This Venus is like a bonus on top of that. And there's only about 8 days per year that are holy on both Venus and sacred round. I mean, Hebrew and sacred round. So every one of these, in those years, you only had 8 days to choose from to make this all work. Anyway. And a lot of those years don't even have a one birth in Venus. It's so long. You get the idea. I can't prove to you how statistically hard this is, but it was amazing when it was discovered. Okay, we're going to stop on slide 171 and turn it to questions. And I've had one question mailed in from Russell, who I don't see here, but maybe I don't need to know. Let me look at the, yes, he is here. I didn't see the participant list. Okay, I will read part of the question and go from there. It was a sort of a repeat of one last week. And he said, you were talking about how the events of the Eastern Hemisphere were all tied to calendars based on the week, and the events in the Western were tied to the Trecina of 13 days. So my question was whether the events with Christ fit into the 13-day calendar, or if other events in the Western Hemisphere were also better aligned with the 13 days. I did say this, but I wondered about modern dates, such as the life of Joseph Smith or the Davidic serpent, if they would fit better into Western or Eastern. Okay, from all I can tell, it doesn't matter where you live. All of the dates of us Westerners here in this continent now happen just as much on the Venus days and the 13 days and the Mars and the planets as they do on anything else. And they all happen on both. Just like I said, the old prophets, it was both the Hebrew, that's on the 7-day Eastern, and it's the sacred round, which is the Western. It's both. And so they both work on both equally well. When you look at Joseph Smith's life, people, given that different people are in different calendars, sometimes that whole family will stick to one calendar. Joseph Smith's family is all on the Hebrew calendar. His father, his mother, himself, Hiram, and Samuel, and I keep meaning to look up William, because he's a bigger player than we have thought in most cases. All of them are born on holy days on the Hebrew calendar. There's only 30 of those in a year of 364 days, 5 days. So there's about a 1 chance in 10 that anybody's birthday is going to be on that. To have 5 people, if you just did it by chance, it'd be, 1 out of 10 times 1 out of 10, it'd be 1 to the 10 to the 5th power. To have all of those 5 people all on holy days on the Hebrew calendar, it's a big deal.
Okay, John, then I'm lost a little bit. What was the point you were making last week about the Eastern Hemisphere and the Western Hemisphere?
Yeah, well, let me say that. Thank you. I didn't answer the obvious question. So the people in the Eastern Hemisphere don't know anything about the Western people. They're all using 7 days, and they know about a priest calendar. They know the Hebrew calendar. Enoch, who's over, whoever Enoch is, he knows about the star calendar. It's on 7 days. but I don't know any evidence that they knew about the other ones. You come over to the Americas, and yes, the Nephites knew about the Hebrew because they were keeping the laws. But I believe it's the Savior when he comes over and he tells them, he teaches them about these other calendars. And so it's more like these are the calendars they use. The American Indians still use the sacred round. They publish books on it. They have an astrology that goes with it. The one book by Raven Hale, Hail, is called the Cherokee Sacred Calendar. And it's just the standard sacred round according to the way most people use it. Anyway, this is the calendar they use. It's really hard to find a 7-day count. People have found it in the Mayan records. There is a 7-day count that's not too important to them. The 13 is huge. So my point really was the people in the Eastern use the 13-day, the Western use the 13-day, the Eastern use the 7-day mostly. But when you come to these sacred people, they're usually sacred on both calendars, which is a witness of the days being correct. Now, did that answer well enough?
Yes, I think that's fine.
Good. Okay, so any other, let me see if let me look at my little chat thing.
I probably should just tell you what I wrote in the chat. You mentioned that on the Mercury cycle, it took 104 and 133 Mercs equal to 104 Mercuries or whatever it was. And then you got to John's life and you said it was 100 equals 101. So I'm not confused. I thought the 104 was the shortest cycle where they could both end up equal.
Oh, I should say it's the shortest cycle where the error is minimum. The difference, in other words, if you think about it, it is 104 and 103. That's like the perfect. But now just picture going 3 cycles before that. So that you're on 100 and 101. It's still going to be really close. It's going to be close enough that it lines up, but it won't be the best. So the other, I probably left out the word the minimum error. When do they line up the best? And they're starting to line up at 100 and 101, but it'll be minimum at the best. I actually have a routine on my web page, and if you're able to run, you have an old browser that'll run the calendar spreadsheet. There's another link that says something like, I'll go look at it right now. It's under calendars. Let's see if I can find it. Yes, under calendars, if you click on that in the left column, and then calendar math, yeah, click on down to calendars, right? Farther down, right there. Whoa, calendars. Click on that. Now, I don't know if this will run on yours. And then the one to click on is calendar math utilities. And on an old browser, if you click on, it's called a realignment interval. If you have an old browser, that will bring up, and you don't. This is the explanation of it up here. But in that big blank spot underneath is where it's supposed to show up if your browser will run Java. And if you can put in the cycle, you can put in the 115 days, 115.877538 days for Mercury, and then put in, see, we're lining up Mercury with what? With the year, I guess. Oh no, we're lining them up with each other. And then you put in 117. So you put in those two numbers and find out what number of cycles of 115 most closely approximates. And it'll show you the answer 103 and 102. but you need an old browser. And that's how I did a lot of this when I was, see, look at the date on this. This has not been updated since 1997. No need to. It works just great. I mean, if you have Java. But that's where I found out these cycles, how they realign, because you can type in any number of cycles and it'll tell you when they best line up and what the error is. So that's a good question to bring to show that utility, which is not normally in my little course. Any other questions?
Yeah, John, I have a question on the book of Jasher.
Okay.
Now, and you talked about a lot, and I've been through it. And what evidences have you seen in the book of Jasher with calendars and alignments? Is there anything there to notice? Because when I went through the book of Jasher, it wasn't with a perspective of sacred calendars. Is there anything to look for there or not?
Okay, let me tell you two things on Jasher. One is, let's go to my homepage. Let's show people how to use my search engine. There is a list of all calendars, but that's a pain to go through. So go back to the main. There you go. Now up on the right hand corner. Whatever. Okay, up the search engine, up in the right hand corner. Yeah, there you go. Click on that. Okay, now type in just type in Jasher.
Jasher.
That's close enough, I think. Okay, and I have the whole book of Jasher online. And that's the first one. That's the whole book of Jasher, translated 1840. Click on the second one that says Book of Jasher. Just click on it. There you go. There it is. There's a whole article on why I believe the Book of Jasher. And it's called How Did the Book of Jasher Know? And if you scroll down a little bit into it, there's a history, authenticity. I'm thinking I'm looking for, keep scrolling a little bit.
That's funny. I've never noticed this commentary on this before. I just thought it was the book.
Here it is, Modern Revelation, the box here. So on the left are quotes from the Book of Jasher, and on the right are books from Modern Revelation. There's a ton of stuff in the Book of Jasher that nobody could have known that was revealed to Joseph Smith. Like the first one there, Joseph Smith, section 107, God called upon Canaan in the wilderness in the 40th year of his age. I mean, that's right in that list of when he ordained the patriarchs. That comes out of nowhere. You say, so what? What's that for? In the Book of Jasher, Canaan is the great-grandson of Adam, Seth, Enos, Canaan, great-grandson of Adam. And Canaan grew up, and he was 40 years old, and he became wise. And he wrote on tablets of stone what was to take place in time to come. So this says God had called upon him, and the other one says he suddenly became wise when he's 40 years old. There's a ton of those. We won't go through them. There's a ton of those where it's clearly authentic before the flood. This is before the flood. What information was transmitted beyond the flood? Anyway, so there's a lot of reason to believe it, is the first part of your question. The second part is, what about the dates? All of the dates work. That's where I get Rebecca's birth, Rebecca's death, Sarah's birth. Well, Sarah's birth and death are both in the Bible. But Leah and Rachel's birth, the fact that they're twins. All of those birth dates work out. I read the whole book of Jubilees. The book of Jubilees has, it'll tell you this is the birth date of Joseph, and it'll tell you every one of these birth dates. None of them make any sense. It's complete baloney. It's a fabrication. You can expose it. None of them work. In Jasher, everything works. There's a couple of little mistakes, but it was written by somebody who was very good with numbers. And There's only a couple of times where it's inconsistent with itself. Was Rebecca, one of them was Rebecca 10 years old or 14 years old when she was taken from marriage? And by looking carefully at how it works, and you saw that chart with how much Rebecca fits in, you can easily pick between two years. So the dates are all correct, and the book really is authentic. Yes, it could have some mistakes. Yes, it can. There can be transcription errors. There could be interpolations, but the book is not a fabrication. It is authentic, meaning it's got some things in it that date before the flood, which to me means it was on the boat. I'll tell you what it's like. The book of Jasher, and then this might be a good place to end if there's no more. But Mormons should be able to pick this up quickly. Let me just tell you a little more history on Jasher, which is not in this article. I think I learned it afterward. Nephi says, I'm keeping 2 sets of plates, big plates, little plates. The big plates have the secular history. Who was the king? Birth dates. It's a civil, it's not inspired particularly. Small plates are the inspired record. The book of Jasher is like the big plates. I don't think Nephi just thought that up by himself. I think that was a tradition they had. Jasher is like the big plates. It's not inspired. It doesn't have revelations. It doesn't have prophecies. Oh, it might have a few that it got from Genesis. But it's not for that. It has the reigns of kings. By the way, I've got a paper coming out this Wednesday on Egyptian chronology. It has the dates that the Egyptian kings reigned and their names. And I don't know anybody that's wild. I know one, but he wasn't very successful, that has tried to relate these names to the standard Egyptology names. That's what the article will be called New Chronology of Ancient Egypt, where I do that. And I use the book of Jasher. But it has the dates of the kings all around, the king of Africa, the king of the Amalekites, and their genealogies and how long they reigned, and of Rome, the children of Chittim. It's a wonderful secular history. So it has the birth, the death dates of the prophets and their wives and kings, but it's not a religious. So the rest of this little story is when Alexander the Great conquers the Jews, he says, hey, I want a copy of your religious book, the old 5 books of Moses, your Bible, your Old Testament. And they talk it. This is how the story goes. I can't say I know that this story is true, but it makes a lot of sense to me. And they say, we can't give this Gentile our sacred book, for goodness sakes. What are we going to do? And someone says, give him the book of Jasher. That sounds like a sacred book. It's our history. That'll make him happy. So they do. And that's, I think, why we have it kept. That's why it hasn't been lost, I believe. So they give him the book of Jasher. And then somebody squeals and rats on him and says, hey, they didn't give you the real thing. And they're trying to appease you, but it's kind of offensive to them. You are an evil Gentile. And he goes back to me and says, look, I want your Bible. And that's when we get the Septenta, or the Septuagint. The 70. He says, and he's the one that set it up. He said, we're going to have, I don't want it goofed up, so we're going to have 70. I want you to come up with 70 scholars, and they're going to be in separate rooms or something, and they all have to translate the whole entire Old Testament and into Greek, because he's Greek, right? And that's where we get the Septuagint, which is the Old Testament from 300 BC, translated into Greek. The story goes on that they all had exactly the same translation, which I don't believe particularly, but the point is 70 scholars worked on translating the Septenta. That's Portuguese. I don't know why I say it in Portuguese. The Septuagint. But it's a book worth having in your library, and I often look up things in the Septuagint, just to see how they're different. So there's the story of the book of Jasher. Oh, and why, so wait a minute, one more, we're a minute over, but just give me a second why scholars ignore it, why they reject it. Because in the first chapters of the book of Jasher, it goes on and tells you the names of the old countries, that it tells you stuff like Elam, who was one of the sons of Shem, is really Persia. And it uses modern names. And the scholars can analyze that and say, it looks like it dates to 1100 AD. Therefore, because of that, because they used modern names which were not even known till 1100 AD, therefore it's a fabrication. Well, it's just like the book, look at the plates of Nephi. Everybody added to it. It wasn't an author of one person. Later people could add to it. That's obviously a later addition where someone says, by the way, if you want to know who these old nations are, here's what they're called, the Frankum. The Gauls are now in the Frankum by the river Sena, you know, and all of this stuff from 1100 AD. And so the most recent copy of Jasher was last updated, the way I look at it, Jasher was last updated in 1100 AD. That does not nullify all of the entries before that because somebody added an explanatory note. The scholars never compared it to the Doctrine and Covenants. That was a big... Anyway, now I think I'm done. Now you know more about the book of Jasher. And it's all on my website, the whole book. And so I have quotes from it that link right to that.
Excellent.
All righty. Till next time.
Thanks for that. Well, with that, let's conclude. As always, we'll put this up on the Restoration Archives and the YouTube channel. And hopefully by Monday, Tuesday, we'll have both of them up, last week and this week's. Thanks, everyone, for joining. And thanks, John, as always.
Good.
Talk to you next week. Thanks.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.